So let's have a look at the structure of a flower. The flower is a unique angiosperm structure that is specialized for sexual reproduction. In many angiosperm species, insects or other animals transfer pollen from one flower to the sex organs on another flower, which makes pollination more directed than wind-dependent pollination of most species of gymnosperms. However, some angiosperms are wind-pollinated, particularly those species that occur in dense populations, such as grasses and tree species in temperate forests. A flower is a specialized shoot that can have up to 4 types of modified leaves called floral organs: sepals, petals, stamens and carpels. Starting at the base of the flower are the sepals, which are usually green and enclose the flower before it opens. Think of a rosebud. Interior to the sepals are the petals, which are brightly colored in most flowers and can aid in attracting pollinators. Flowers that are wind-pollinated, such as grasses, generally lack brightly colored parts. In all angiosperms, the sepals and petals are sterile floral organs, meaning that they do not produce sperm or eggs. Within the petals are 2 types of fertile floral organs that produce spores, the stamens and carpels. Stamens and carpels are sporophylls, modified leaves that are specialized for reproduction. Stamens are microsporophylls. They produce microspores that develop into pollen grains containing male gametophytes. The stamen consists of a stalk, called the filament, and a terminal sac, the anther, where pollen is produced. Carpels are megasporophylls. They produce megaspores that give rise to female gametophytes. The carpel is the container where seeds are enclosed. As such, it is a key structure that distinguishes angiosperms from gymnosperms. At the tip of the carpel is a sticky stigma that receives pollen. A style leads from the stigma to a structure at the base of the carpel, the ovary. The ovary contains 1 or more ovules. As in gymnosperms, each angiosperm ovule contains a female gametophyte. If fertilized, an ovule develops into a seed. A flower may have 1 or more carpels. In many species, multiple carpels are fused into one structure. The term pistil is sometimes used to refer to a single carpel. Flowers also vary in symmetry and other aspects of shape, as well as size, color, and odor. Much of this diversity results from adaptation to specific pollinators. The flower of the sporophyte produces microspores that form male gametophytes and megaspores that form female gametophytes. The male gametophytes are in the pollen grains, which develop within microsporangia in the anthers. Each male gametophyte has 2 haploid cells, a generative cell that divides forming 2 and a tube cell that produces pollen tube. Each ovule which develops in the ovary contains a female gametophyte known as an embryo sac. The embryo sac consists of only a few cells, one of which is the egg. After its release from the anther, the pollen is carried to the sticky stigma at the tip of a carpel. Although some flowers self-pollinate, most have mechanisms that ensure cross-pollination, which in angiosperms is the transfer of pollen from an anther of a flower on one plant to the stigma of a flower on another plant of the same species. Cross-pollination enhances genetic variability. In some species, stamens and carpels of a single flower may mature at different times, or they may be so arranged that self-pollination is unlikely. The pollen grain absorbs water and germinates after it adheres to the stigma of a carpel. The tube cell produces a pollen tube that grows down within the style of the carpel. After reaching the ovary, the pollen tube penetrates through the micropylae, a pore in the integument's of the ovule, and discharges 2 sperm cells into the female gametophyte. One sperm fertilizes the egg, forming a diploid zygote. The other sperm fuses with the 2 nuclei in the large central cell of the female gametophyte. This type of double fertilization, in which one fertilization event produces a zygote and the other produces a triploid cell, is unique to angiosperms. After double fertilization, the ovule matures into a seed. The zygote develops into a sporophyte embryo with a rudimentary root and 1 or 2 seed leaves called cotyledons. The triploid central cell of the female gametophyte develops into endosperm, tissue rich in starch and other food reserves that nourish the developing embryo. What is the function of double fertilization in angiosperms? One hypothesis is that double fertilization synchronizes the development of food storage in the seed with the development of the embryo. If a particular flower is not pollinated or sperm cells are not discharged into the embryo sac, fertilization does not occur, and neither endosperm nor embryo will form. So perhaps double fertilization is an adaptation that prevents flowering plants from squandering nutrients on infertile ovules. So let's have a look at the different stages of the life cycle of an angiosperm. So in number 1, in the megasporangium of each ovule, megasporocyte divides by meiosis, producing 4 megaspores. One survives and gives gives rise to a female gametophyte. So in number 2, in the anther of a stamen, each microsporangium contains microsporocytes that divide by meiosis, producing microspores. In number 3, a microspore develops into a pollen grain. The generative cell of the gametophyte will divide, forming 2 sperm. The tube cell will produce the pollen tube. In number 4, after pollination, eventually 2 sperm cells are discharged in each ovule. In number 5, double fertilization occurs. One sperm fertilizes the egg, forming a zygote. The other sperm fertilizes the central cell, forming the endosperm. Number 6, the zygote develops into an embryo that is packaged along with food into a seed. The fruit tissues surrounding the seed are not shown in the diagram. And in number 7, when a seed germinates, the embryo develops into a mature sporophyte. And that is the life cycle of an angiosperm. In summary, angiosperms are plants with flowers. Flowers attract organisms such as bees, bats and beetles to pollinate flower. There are also different groups of angiosperms. So let's look at those groups now. So let's have a look at angiosperm diversity. Species with 1 cotyledon are often called monocots, and those with 2 are usually called dicots. Other features such as flower and leaf structure are usually defined in those 2 groups. However, recent DNA studies indicate that the species traditionally called dicots are paraphyletic. The vast majority of species once categorized as dicots form a large clade known as eudicots. Now the rest of the former dicots are now grouped into 4 small lineages. 3 of those lineages, Amborella, water lilies, and star anise and relatives, are informally called basal angiosperms because they diverged from other angiosperms early in the history of the group. A 4th lineage, magnoliids, evolved later. So we have the basal angiosperms, the magnoliids, the monocots, and the eudicots. 2/3 of angiosperm species are actually eudicots, which make up about 170,000 species. Also important is the rose family, including many plants with ornamental flowers, as well as some species with edible fruits, strawberry, apple and pear trees. So let's discuss some of the properties and functions of fruits. So as a seed develops from ovules after fertilization, the ovary wall thickens and the ovary matures into a fruit. A pea pod is an example of a fruit with seeds, mature ovules, the peas encased in the ripened ovary of the pod. Now fruits protect seeds and aid in their dispersal. Mature fruits can either be fleshy or dry. Tomatoes, plums and grapes are examples of fleshy fruits in which the wall, the pericarp of the ovary, will become soft during ripening. Dried fruits include beans, nuts and grains. Some dry fruits split open at maturity to release seeds, whereas others remain closed. The dry wind dispersed fruits of grasses harvested while on the plant are major staple foods for humans. The cereal grains of maize, rice, wheat and other grasses, though easily mistaken for seeds, are actually a fruit with dry outer covering, the formal wall of the ovary that adheres to the seed coat of the seed within. Now various adaptations of fruits and seeds help to disperse seed. The seeds of some flowering plants such as dandelions and maples are contained within fruits that function like parachutes or propellers. Adaptations that enhance dispersal by wind. Some fruits, such as coconuts, are adapted to dispersal by water, and the seeds of many angiosperms are carried by animals. Some angiosperms have fruit modified as burrs that cling to animal fur or the clothes of humans. Others produce edible fruits, which are usually nutritious, sweet-tasting, and vividly colored, advertising their ripeness. When an animal eats the fruit, it digests the fruit's fleshy part, but the tough seeds usually pass unharmed through the animal's digestive tract. When the animal defecates, it may deposit the seeds along with a supply of natural fertilizer many kilometers from where the fruit was eaten. So let's have a look at the effects of seed plants on human welfare. Most of our food comes from angiosperms. Just 6 crops, maize, rice, wheat, potatoes, cassava and sweet potatoes yield 80% of all the calories consumed by humans. We also depend on angiosperms to feed livestock. It takes 5 to 7 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilogram of grain-fed beef. Today's crops are the products of artificial selection, the result of plant domestication that began about 12,000 years ago. To appreciate the scale of this transformation, note how the number and size of seeds in domesticated plants are greater than those of their wild relatives, as is the case of maize and the grass teosinte. decay. Scientists can glean information about domestication by comparing the genes of crops with those of wild relatives. With maize, dramatic changes such as increased cob size and loss of the hard coating around teosinte kernels may have been initiated by as few as 5 mutations. Now, flowering plants also provide other edible products. 2 popular beverages come from tea leaves and coffee beans, and you can thank the cacao tree for cocoa and chocolate. Spices are derived from various plant parts, such as flowers, fruits and seeds, and even bark. So let's have a look at some more products from seed plants. Many seed plants are sources of wood, which is absent in all living seedless plants. Wood consists of a tough-walled xylem cells. It's a primary source of fuel for much of the world, and wood pulp, typically derived from conifers such as fir and pine, is used to make paper. Wood remains the most widely used construction material. For centuries, humans have depended on seed plants for medicines. Many cultures use herb remedies, and scientists have extracted and identified medicinally active compounds from many of these plants and later synthesized them. So let's have a look at the human threats to plant diversity. Although plants may be a renewable resource, plant diversity is not. The exploding human population and its demand for space and resources are threatening plant species across the globe. The problem is especially severe in the tropics, where more than 2/3 of the human population live and where population growth is fastest. About 63,000 square kilometers of tropical rainforest are cleared each year that would completely eliminate the remaining 11 million square kilometers tropical forests in 175 years. The loss of forests reduces the absorption of atmospheric carbon, not to mention the release of oxygen that occurs during photosynthesis, potentially contributing to global warming. Also, as forests disappear, so do a large number of plant species. Of course, once a plant species becomes extinct, it can never return. Many people have ethical concerns about contributing to the extinction of species. In addition, there are practical reasons to be concerned about the loss of plant diversity. So far, we have explored the potential uses of only a tiny fraction of the more than 290,000 known plant species. For example, almost all our food is based on the cultivation of only about 24 species of seed plants, and fewer than 5,000 plant species have been studied as potential sources of medicines. So again, practice your Quizlet terminology and make sure you've completed all the chapters to date. And that is the end of today's lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay healthy and stay safe. See you next week. Bye for now.